For this lesson, we're going to paint a colorful fantail goldfish. So what you'll really be learning here is working with your brush strokes, color intensity, and lost edges. Now I've gone ahead and put the pencil drawing on watercolor paper. And don't worry if your drawing's not perfect. We just want an idea where we're going to put the fish and place our color. And since this is an orange goldfish, I can either use an orange color or I can blend two colors together to make an orange. And for that, all I need to do is take a red and a yellow and blend them together. Now you can use tubes of color or paint sets, and every set is going to be slightly different. And some will have more pigment, that means more color in it, than others. So what that really means to you is that if you just don't get that color that you want, once it's completely dry, you can go back in and add another layer. Basically, paint on top of it. Now let's say your pencil line's just a little too dark. Use a kneaded eraser and roll it right over the pencil line. Now you may be wondering, what kind of eraser is that? It looks like a little gray square that you can actually shape into a roll. And it sort of acts like a silly putty or chewing gum and picks up the excess graphite. Now using a big brush and clean water, I'm going to wet the paper here and there around the areas where I want the fins to be. And when I mean clean water, you should be able to look through it. Now I know this has a little bit of color in it, but it'll be fine. Then using a medium-sized brush, I'm going to go back to the color in the palette and blend it well. If you noticed, when I applied the water around the fins, I kept it more towards the back side of the fin. Then using the brush loaded with color, I'll go along the pencil line, on the top fin, along the back and head. And as I'm doing this, I'd like you to notice how much water I have in that color mixture. It's able to move, but it has a lot of color in it. And to make this more interesting, I'll bring in a little red. Now I don't want to fill in the entire fish. I'm basically just outlining the very top of it. And I'll work in smaller areas. I don't want to be overwhelmed by too much space at one time. And I'll show you why. Using the water, let's just put that where the fin's going to go and in the body. And take our brush of water and barely touch the edge of color. Now this only works if the color's still wet, because if it's dry, it's not going to move. Now the reason why we're doing it this way is because when you have the water next to the color, it's really fun to see it spread. Then only using water, I'll continue to fill in the area of the fish. I'll paint around the eye and stay within the pencil line. At least as close as possible. Now it's really fun to just use that water and allow that color to pull down into the rest of the fish, because that way it looks like we're using different colors, but it's really only water. Now notice how I'm using just the very tip of my brush, and I'm painting around the eyes and leaving a small white space for the mouth. Then using a little more clean water, I'll bring it right up to the back of the goldfish so I can dissolve that hard line. Now I want to keep some definition, but by using that combination of blurred lines and hard edges, it allows the viewer to use their imagination. And for the fin, all I'm going to do is change the amount of pressure on my brush. That means I'm pressing a little harder to widen the stroke. Then just like we did before, I'll apply clean water and let the color run into it. And if the color doesn't want to move, just wiggle your brush a little bit and encourage it. And if you want, you can go ahead, add a little more color, but try not to fill it in completely. And to keep the color consistent, I like to take my brush and swirl it around my palette and keep that color moving and blended. Then using my wet brush, I'll soften the color and work on the other fins too. Now, since we have so much orange, I think it might be nice to give it a little bit of a shadow. So I'll use a little French ultramarine blue, or you can use any blue, and you can either take a little brown or even some of that orange and mix it in to create a shadow color. So what you're basically doing is taking two complementary colors, the blue and the orange, and turning them into a third neutral color, which you can use for your shadow. Then I'll continue adding my orange color right along the pencil line. And if you're not exactly on the line, that's okay, because the rest of the goldfish is really loose anyway. Now I'm not really filling in shapes. What I'm doing here is just applying a brush stroke of color along a pencil line and then using the clean water to soften the edge. And play with the amount of pressure on the brush. Press a little harder to widen the stroke, and to get that tapered edge, as you move out to the tip, just lift your brush. And if it makes it just a little easier to reach an area, it's okay to turn your paper. Now this is starting to look more like a goldfish. We have our body, the fins, working on the tail, and to help give it some transparency, all we need to do is use our clean water and soften the edge of color. When I apply the water, I want to make sure that I have a wide enough stroke so the color can continue to travel. Now, if you happen to be using a brush that comes with a watercolor set, sometimes those can be really floppy, and you may have to work a little harder. And what I mean by that is try to notice how much pressure you're applying to the brush. Are you pressing so hard that the brush just flops right over, or barely touching it and no water's coming out, or are you barely touching the paper and it's releasing a lot of water? All it is practice, and the more you paint, the better you'll get. Now I'm thinking that I want to turn the fin a little bit. All I have to do is load my brush full of color and turn the brush stroke. Not have it be straight. Have a little bend to it. Now I'm just going to continue repeating what I've done, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit. All I'm doing is trying to dissolve some of that color, bring it out a little further, and keep the focus and attention on that really bright color. Now I'm pretty happy with this, but it needs more detail. So before I do anything else, I'm going to let this completely dry. So I've left it alone for a while. And how I can tell that it's dry is I'm touching it with the back of my hand, and if it feels cool to the touch, it's still too wet. But this is good, so I can continue. Now I want this to be a really colorful goldfish. So using our same orange, I'll just reapply a little more color here and there. Basically, all I'm really doing is applying another layer of color on top of the layer that we just did. You can also call this glazing. We're stacking color upon color. Then I'll go ahead and bring the same color down through the nose and mouth. Now those brush strokes can look a little funny. That's why I want to soften them with a little clean water. Then to help shape the fins a little more, what I'll do is press my brush and lift. I'll also take a look and see if there's any other fin I need to do this to. Then just like we did earlier with the first couple of fins, I'll take a little blue and mix it with a little burnt sienna or brown, or you could even use the orange, so it's more of a neutral color, and add a few shadows in the tail. And just like we did throughout the entire painting, I'll soften a few edges. Then to help the fins have a little more character, I'll use a smaller brush and add a few stripes going from the outside, painting in towards the body. Now you don't have to paint a lot of them, just add a few of them. Now it's time to add the eyes and final touches. Now before you add the eyes, make sure that your goldfish is completely dry. Otherwise the color is going to spread. Then using a very small brush, all I need to do is add just a little bit of color here. Now if you don't have a small brush, you could even use a felt tip pen. And if you noticed, I'm leaving a little white spot that looks like a horseshoe on the very top. Then I'll just add a little more detail around the mouth and add the gill. Now I'm really happy with this, and I'll call this done. But what I could do with all that white paper behind it, I could break up that space by just spattering a little bit of color. Now we don't need much, so just gently tap your brush here and there. And now we have a wonderful little painting of a goldfish. Now if you want, you don't even have to make this orange. You could actually make it pink or any kind of color that you want. You could make it a rainbow goldfish or put spots in it. It's all about having fun. So until next time, happy painting.